Hi, Ant.
Hi, Doug.
Good to see you again. And we spend a lot of time talking to founders and entrepreneurs. In a bit of a departure from that, you were actually the CEO of a business that we sold a few years ago now, Factmata. Maybe you could just give us a bit of background into what Factmata was and what your journey into Factmata was.
Sure. So yeah, I was looking to get back into communications and specifically AI, and I came across Factmata, and it was well respected in the industry, like it was known, like people had heard of it, and this was the misinformation, disinformation, fake news kind of industry, which was just blowing up. This is like 2017, 2018. We'd had the US election, we'd had Brexit. It was in the public consciousness that fake news was a thing, and Factmata was well respected in that space. So I reached out to Dhruv, who was the original founder, and said, "Look, I want to help you. What can I do?" And he said, "Well."
So you proactively got in touch with the founder.
I did my research on the companies in the space, and Factmata was almost I think it was my first choice of companies I wanted to work with because the mission was sound, and it looked like their technology approach was right. So I reached out to Dhruv and said, "Yeah, how can I help?" And he said, "Well, funny old thing, I'm looking for a CEO." So
great timing.
Just great timing that he needed someone with my specific background and skill set to come in at that time in the business.
Well, just in outline, what was your background? What was the kind of pre-Factmata life for you?
So Factmata was a company looking, obviously, it was AI based. It was looking at really communications technology. And my background was in the last 10 years, I worked solely in AI. And before that, I'd worked solely in communications. So the background I had for how AI could specifically kind of apply to that kind of problem, I think I had that. But also my network was a lot of the companies that Dhruv was already talking to. So I was a chair of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations kind of Greater London group. I was still actively networking in public relations and communications. And I knew some of the other founders in the space because of other things I've been involved with. So I was connected. I felt like it was quite an organic kind of move into the business because it wasn't completely alien. It wasn't some random business. I knew the industry. So Dhruv needed some help, and there was like a very brief transition period of me working enough with Dhruv for Dhruv to get a sense that I could do it. And then almost after 2 months, he kind of transitioned out, and I was the CEO. It was actually surprisingly quick.
Right, yeah. Right. And when you joined, was there any discussion at that point about the possibility that the business might get sold?
Yeah, so it wasn't the only option, but Dhruv had considered that a sale might be the best outcome for the business. And I think I came in with no kind of supposed outcomes for what I thought the business can achieve. It took me a couple of months of working with Dhruv to look at the technology he'd built, thinking about the kind of scenarios it could be applied in, what were the use cases, what was the market that could go to. And it took a couple of months for me to kind of come to the solid conclusion that given the technology he'd built, and looking more in depth at the fake news and kind of disinformation market, that actually a sale was probably going to be the best outcome for this business by far. So then we started reorganizing the business to get it ready for that, which has effectively meant, from my point of view, not building out too much of the product, the ancillary sort of features and the table stakes features that the market needed, but focusing on building out specifically the AI that would differentiate us and slot into one of the other larger players in that market.
Yeah. Why did you think it was the right thing for the business ultimately to find a narrow niche and then an exit? I mean, what was it about the space that you were in that?
Yeah. So I was doing some research on the other kind of misinformation, disinformation players, and I was seeing that they're all largely academic spin-offs. Like there was a lot of academic work in the space, but trying to find companies that had really scaled, there wasn't any, because the biggest contracts were coming from the likes of Facebook or Meta it is now, or government contracts, but there wasn't really a scalable solution, right? You couldn't go from that market to another market, like that's it. So the best you can do is win a few contracts from Facebook or win a few contracts from government grants, but that doesn't give you a scalable journey, right? Ultimately, that means at some point you're going to hit a maximum amount of growth, and then you're going to be stagnant, and then it's going to be difficult to bring investors in, and therefore, is it really sustainable? And there was also the structure of the business, the investment that Dhruv already had was significant.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think it was going to be possible.
From some quite big names as well.
For some massive
the cap
names,
table,
right?
Yeah.
Some massive names, internet royalty, really, and also royalty, right? So the money had already effectively come in. It wasn't going to be possible for me at that time to create a story that even though the business had been around for like 3 or 4 years by that point, I wasn't going to be able, with the money we had, to be able to tell a story that would bring in significantly more investment, right? So we had the money we had. And so that was one of the other factors that drove me towards, right, let's focus on a specific aspect of the technology. In some ways, broaden it out, right? Because we were using AI to detect fake news and misinformation. Very, very niche. And when I was thinking about the markets other than going after Meta or government contracts, for me, maybe because of my background, public relations and communications, I thought that's a market that should have a care about their brands being associated. We saw like with Metro Bank runs on the bank because of a fake news crisis, about there being a run on the bank. So we saw that there was this green shoots of people in that industry caring about it. And that's why I felt that probably best to sell the business, because that market is already owned by 3 or 4 massive players, right? We weren't going to grow from a startup to challenge any of those guys, because some of the entry requirements to that market is data. You have to have a huge amount of data, all the contracts in place to hoover up all the social media posts and all the news articles, such that those end users can rely on the results. And we weren't in a position to get that amount of coverage. So we couldn't be good at this. We had to be good at really this specific AI, which led itself again more towards an integration and a sale.
Yeah. So for you personally, in startup environment, with the idea that you might get sucked into a much bigger organization, how did that sit with you? How much thought did you give that scenario?
I was really driven by what were the options available to the business and what was the best outcome for the business. Like, obviously, if you've got a route towards growing the business, then go ahead and grow the business. I had no preconditions towards growing it or selling it, but looking at the options available to us, it felt to me quite obvious that getting it into another business had to be the route, in which case that was my job. That was the kind of the agreement I'd had with Dhruv, is like, find out what the outcome is for this business and do best by the investors and by the team. And so that's what we drove. And I obviously talked it through with the team, talked it through with Dhruv, and everyone was in agreement. Everyone was happy. That was the best outcome.
So this was widely understood amongst even the workforce, was it?
Yeah, we were a small team, right? We're a startup team. And kind of the way I explained it, the way I justified that thought process to the team is, you can either carry on working for this business, and it's got some notoriety in this space, right? It's a good thing to have on your CV. But a better thing to have on your CV is to have it be acquired because it's that successful, right? Or worst case, it fails, and then you've got that kind of gap on your CV when you didn't really achieve anything. Like, what did you do at this company that no one's ever heard of? But be able to say you had an exit is better for everyone's CV.
So was there an event or a circumstance that sort of was a catalyst for you starting the process to search for an acquirer, or to begin the process of an exit?
There were some overhanging conversations Dhruv had already had that I think I kind of maintained. There was a couple of advisors and people who were connecting us to people. I sort of maintained those as they were going forwards. And then I think it was the case of bringing in some of the money from some of the routes. We had crowdfunding, we had investment from foreign investment direct into the business. It was like working out the roadmap. I wanted to increase the value of the business as much as I could, but I didn't want to take that plan too far to the point where we were going to run out of money. So I kind of planned as far as I could and felt that, focus on growing the business, improving the value, and getting the biggest kind of case studies that we could, and then effectively working back from the point we ran out of money to, okay, in that case we need to sell by this. This is the best optimum moment to sell. We've proved as much as we could, but we haven't kind of gone beyond our runway, which of course always works out, and worked out perfectly for us.
When that point, or when you were approaching that point, did you feel as if the business was actually ready to be sold, other than the kind of high level commercial? I mean, in terms of business readiness. This is the first time I sold a business, and this is my third startup, but the first that had an exit. So I've not been through that process from the inside before. So I didn't actually have much of an idea as to what a readiness looked like, other than through Googling and my conversations with other people. So I wasn't really aware. All I was focusing on was create the right story, create the right need in the market. And we were fortunate that we won a really decent kind of well-known brand as a client, which showed the proof of the technology we achieved. And after that, it was like, great, we're not going to get any bigger than that brand to prove that the technology works and valuable. We've got to get to exit as soon as possible. Yeah. And if I remember right, you had some inbound interest as well, didn't you? So you had some approaches from potential acquirers along the way?
Yeah, it was a real mix of overhanging conversations, people coming direct to us, and then also, us thinking like who would be the most appropriate.
Let's skip the process for a minute, because I think we can come back to that. I think you've got some interesting thoughts on that, which you shared earlier with me. In the aftermath, or rather as you were as you realized that it was an eventuality that was going to be realized, what were your expectations of life afterwards?
It's interesting. So my expectations of life afterwards were that nothing could be worse than the life before. So, I mean, it was such a stressful period, right? And really, I was so focused on getting an outcome for the team, making sure that they were done right by being made whole, that they had good jobs, that they had some kind of career, that this was going to be a good thing on their CV. I was so focused on those outcomes. I really didn't think much about my own kind of perspective, other than if I ended up with a job after it, great. But honestly, my expectations were so low because I couldn't see further than, and you say that, when the eventuality became realized, but up until 24 hours before the deal was done, it still wasn't a certainty, right? You remember I was trying to get those signatures, and it was like 40 odd signatures, which I got once and then got told I had to get them again. So that really kind of shortened my horizons of planning to the point of let's just get all these problems solved, and whatever comes after, frankly, is a bonus. And it ended up, and it did end up better than I could have hoped.
So talk us through that. What does that now look, or what did that look like initially, and what's that become?
So effectively, this was during the AI boom, right? So as I landed in November of 22, which is the same month that ChatGPT was released. So I landed as an AI sort of product specialist in a company that deals a lot with language. That is their business at the time when the frontier of AI took a massive leap forward in large language models. So our industry in particular was ripe for disruption, and they lacked really anyone at the strategic level to think about AI in those terms. So I spent the next year integrating the technology from Factmata, but then also thinking more advanced and further down the line of what does this really mean for the industry. And that's what I've been doing for the last kind of
year and a half. So you kind of built a career and almost a new job function, if you like, in that new world order.
Yeah, and this company, like many, is still trying to figure out what does generative AI really mean for us? What does it mean for our industry? And I'm part and parcel of that.
Knowing what you know now, what would you say to people who are potentially going to be exploring an exit for their business? And what advice would you give? What steer, guidance?
Yeah, I guess, well, the number one thing is actually before you head into the business, right? If you think a sale is on the cards, you've got to start planning from that, like from the very start. Like so many of the challenges we faced were because of problems with our documentation or problems with contracts and things that were 2 or 3 years old and wouldn't be a concern if you're running the business. But if you're selling the business, have to be a concern, because those things will slow down and did slow down as, we had a different problem every week, right, with the sale of the business because of things that hadn't been planned far enough in advance. So I think if you're thinking about selling the business, then making sure you're planning far enough in advance. And if you are selling the business, have a plan B. Because I had no plan B, right? Because of the amount of time this took, it was more than a full-on job just to maintain the business, deal with the constant churn of running the business, but also going through the sale. I didn't prioritize time for myself to give myself my own plan B or exit strategy. It was like sell the business or catastrophe. My advice would be, do not do that. That's a terrible plan. And I apologized to my wife afterwards for putting her in that position, because that was irresponsible. I'm an optimistic guy, and I felt like the deal was going to go through, but then it dragged like month after month after month. I still felt that it was going to go through, but with every month, the pressure and the risk of it not coming off increased. And so I should earlier, I think, have started giving myself an exit plan. I think you probably advised me more than once to do that. And I was like, no, it's fine. It'll go through, and I'm going to make it work. And I haven't got time for like job hunting when, there's people that depend on making this happen.
Yeah, so you didn't need a plan B, but...
I was unfortunately rewarded for not taking the time out to do that, right? It worked out, which is the wrong lesson to learn, I think.
Yeah. So what else? What other learnings do you take from having gone through that?
So I think the interesting thing is the things that I wouldn't have thought were important, like when we're a tech business, right? Every single line of code has to be accounted for, right? Who wrote that line of code? Where are they? And have you got, a contract that can say they've signed over kind of, ownership of that line of code to you? That has to be in place for every single person that even goes near your code. And as a startup, like many startups, I think, we'd had a bunch of kind of transient workers, contractors, and things like that. That huge number of people, like 80 or 100 people, had touched our code at some point. And making sure you've got good grip on that, because that was a larger problem than I expected. Another really important one, I think, was the financial aspects. So Dhruv had raised a lot of money through convertible loan notes. But effectively what ended up happening was those convertible loan notes had kind of come due and were owed. So any money he brought into the business would have paid off one of those loan notes, right? Because that's the terms. So in fact, I would have had to have raised an incredible amount of money to even have enough money left in the business to drive it other than paying off the loan notes. He built this like ladder problem for himself, which was, again, you can't say you wouldn't have done the same thing in the same situation, needing money and that being a route. But definitely, I think if you're planning for a long-term growth model, then building that ladder problem of convertible loan note after convertible loan note wouldn't be something I would recommend.
Yeah, and that's pretty classic in the startup world, right? Because the great hope is that all comes good in the end.
Yeah.
And that path isn't always smooth, should we say.
Yeah.
What difference did it make to the process having an advisor on board?
So I think there's many different ways of looking at that. There was definitely like an emotional value, right? Because the process was elongated and stressful, and with every passing month, it got more and more stressful. And there was an emotional knowing that there was someone you could talk to, because I couldn't share absolutely everything with the team, right? Because I was trying to maintain them for the journey and keep their spirits high and keep them focused on what they needed to do. So if I needed to vent or like really worry about the worst case scenario, I couldn't do that with anyone inside the company. I had to do that with you, right? Someone outside, So there was an emotional kind of vent or valve that I think was super useful. And then as we're going through the process, I think there was a mixture of decisions, like every single meeting with the acquirer, every meeting with a potential acquirer, you're thinking through who's on the call, what's their backgrounds, how do we play the call, how do we cover this problem, how do we cover this subject. All that thought is much more useful to think through someone who's done those kinds of conversations 100 times in the past, right? I was approaching every single one of those calls fresh. And I think when we discussed it, it was often the case that I might have already thought those things through and my approach might be the right one. And in some cases, your advice was, you're right, that is exactly what I want to do. And that doesn't mean that you weren't valuable, because otherwise I would have been second guessing myself through each of those. So even if we agreed on the approach, you were still valuable in that I could take my mind off of that and think about other things, right? If Doug thinks that's the right thing to do and I think that's the right thing to do, we're probably okay. In that case, I can focus on something else, which is not something I would have done if you weren't there. I would have been second guessing that as well as all the other things. Yeah. So there's like a speed and a stress that were removed, I think, from having you guys on board. Like ultimately, if I was doing this again, 100%, I'd engage you guys again. Even though I'd been through it before now, or I'd be a seasoned vet, nowhere near as seasoned as you guys.
Done it once, you're an expert, right?
Done it once, an expert, right? So even if I'd done it once and considered, I've done this before, it's fine. I went through enough of the process to know that there's so many different routes that could have taken. That the route that we took is now something I'm experienced of. That's only one of 100 different routes that could end up going. So I think that's the thing that made the difference for me, knowing that someone had been through this 100 times, could tell me you're on the right path, and then tell me this is one of the hardest things or one of the hardest sales you've ever seen, which is kind of somewhat reassuring.
Yeah, there were complexities in it that were unusual. Let's put it that way. Good. All right. Well, thank you for that. So, post-transaction world for Ant Cousins, what does that look like now?
Significantly less stressful. So the difference of going from the person that the buck stops with you, right, is the CEO. Like ultimately everything rides on you. If you don't make it happen, if you don't push it, it's not going to happen. The difference of now working for a large company where if I take a day's holiday, the world doesn't stop. That is just such a massive relief. Like I took my first 2-week holiday in 10 years last month.
Well earned. Yeah.
Well earned. For the last 10 years, I've been in startups the entire time. Even when you take holidays, you're never 100% present, right? Because you're in the back of the mind, you're thinking about the things you've got to do, or you're dropping just into your emails or to messages just to keep things moving along. Or there's some things that really only you can do. And now I'm in a business where there's like 4,000 other people. And yeah, the world will not stop if I take a day off. So I took my first 2-week holiday. And the difference that makes, the ability to do that and not be guilty about it, is huge. So I'm much more present with my family. I'm enjoying spending time with my daughter. And that was, I think, another thing that changed throughout this process, right? I had a 6-month-old daughter by the time we sold. And even though, I was with her, wasn't 100% present. And now she is 100% the number one priority for me. And I know that I'm there and I'm enjoying it. So
good.
Priorities change.
Good on you. And are you still in touch with any of the old team? Any of the
Yeah, a ton of them are still working for the company that acquired us. And the ones that are kind of around, we still kind of catch up routinely, still talk to Dhruv weekly. And still, in some cases, because I'm still almost advising him on the American side of the business, right? Because it was split into UK and UK subsidiaries, one of the complications. So I'm still advising him on the US entity.
Okay.
And things like that. So yeah, still in good contact.
I hope he always buys the coffee.
Not yet. We're largely remote. But yeah, I think even though it's extremely stressful, I think we were really fortunate to come through it with those relationships intact. Yeah, pretty happy, really happy with the outcome, frankly. Given the likelihood of it coming off and the likelihood of a bad outcome, what we got was amazing.
Well, thanks so much for coming and talking to us today, Ant. We really appreciate it. We know you're busy, even though you can obviously afford to take a bit of time out of the office these days. But it's been good to see you and do stay in touch.
Yeah, good to see you again.